to repay her brother's debt, she wed a ruthless millionaire. But on their first night— Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's story. The rain came down in relentless sheets, washing the neon lights of downtown New York into a blur of gold and gray. Lena Parker stood at the bottom of the marble steps leading to Cross Enterprises, her coat soaked through, her hands gripping a single envelope that had already begun to dissolve in the rain. Inside was the letter that had ruined her life, her brother's debt notice, signed by the very man she had come to meet tonight, Ethan Cross. The name alone made her chest tighten. Everyone in the city knew him, the youngest self-made millionaire, a man whose empire stretched from technology to finance. People called him the Ice King. No one ever said his name without a trace of fear or fascination. When the limousine rolled to a stop in front of her, its black paint gleamed under the streetlights like a blade. A suited driver stepped out, umbrella in hand. "Miss Parker," he said quietly. "Mr. Cross will see you now." "Oh." She hesitated. Every part of her screamed to run, to hide, to pretend this night never happened. But she thought of her brother Daniel lying in the hospital after the loan shark's warning. She thought of the words on the letter, "Final notice." Inside the limousine, the air smelled faintly of leather and rain. Ethan Cross sat opposite her, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. His eyes steel gray, calm and cold, barely lifted when she entered. "I heard you want to settle your brother's debt," he said. His voice was low, even almost disinterested. "Yes," she whispered, clutching the envelope. "Please, I will pay every dollar back. I just need time." He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching like a wire between them. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Time is the one thing you do not have, Miss Parker." Lena's throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" A faint smile curved his lips sharp, almost cruel. "A wife." She blinked, certain she had misheard him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Ethan said, his tone smooth as glass. "You will marry me. For 1 year. You will follow my rules, live in my house, and play the role I need you to play. In return, your brother's debt, every cent of it, will disappear." Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the rain drumming against the car windows. "You cannot be serious." I never joke about contracts," he replied. "This marriage is business, nothing more. You will be compensated for your performance. After 1 year, you will be free." Lena stared at him, the world spinning in silence around her. The man across from her looked flawless, every inch of him carved from ice and power, but something in his eyes warned her. Once she signed that contract, there would be no turning back. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Inside, Ethan extended a pen toward her and said softly, "Do we have a deal, Mrs. Parker?" The following morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Cross Enterprises, cutting through the fog that still clung to the streets. Inside the top-floor office, the world was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock. Lena sat across a glass desk that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a workplace. Her hands were clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Ethan Cross stood by the window, his back to her. He was reading something on his phone, unmoved by her presence. The faint reflection of the city lights glimmered on the glass behind him. She had barely slept. The words from the night before kept echoing in her mind. "You will marry me. For 1 year." She had convinced herself it was a dream, until his assistant called at dawn, summoning her here to sign the paperwork. A folder sat in front of her now, thick, precise, bound in black leather. The title stamped in silver letters read, "Marriage Contract." Her throat felt dry as paper. "Is this legal?" she finally asked. Her voice trembled despite her effort to sound strong. Ethan turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Every contract I make is legal, Miss Parker." He approached the desk, his steps calm and measured. "You sign this, and your brother's debt is erased within the hour." Lena hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the folder. "Why me? You could have chosen anyone." He paused. because anyone would have wanted something in return. You only want to save your brother. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker, something close to curiosity behind his cold eyes. Ethan slid the pen toward her. Page 3, line 7. Read it carefully. She unfolded the pages, her eyes scanning the precise language. Every clause felt like a trap. She must live in his estate. She must attend social functions as his wife. She could not reveal the contract to anyone. And above all, she must remain for exactly 12 months. There were no promises of affection, no illusions of romance, only business. When she reached the final page, she found the clause that made her chest tighten. The party referred to as the wife agrees to maintain the appearance of a genuine marital relationship, including public interactions and cohabitation, for the duration of the contract. Her lips parted. Cohabitation? Ethan's gaze met hers. Do not overthink it. The world expects a marriage, not a fairy tale. You will have your own room. She felt her heart ease only slightly. He extended the pen again. Once you sign, there is no going back. Outside the office, rain clouds began to clear. A single beam of light caught the silver ink of the contract. Lena exhaled and signed her name in careful, shaking letters. Ethan took the folder, glanced at the signature, then pressed a button on his phone. Transfer the funds, Parker account, full payment. Within seconds, the screen of her old phone lit up. A message appeared from her bank. The amount owed every single dollar was gone. Her relief came like a wave, but it was hollow. She looked up at Ethan. So, it's done? It is binding, he said simply. You are now Mrs. Cross. He walked to the door and turned back, his voice firm but not unkind. My driver will take you to the estate. Mrs. Keller, the housekeeper, will show you your room. Dinner is served at 7. Do not be late. Lena rose to her feet, the floor seeming to tilt under her. The title, Mrs. Cross, echoed in her ears like a bell she had not agreed to ring. As the car drove through the city toward the coast, she watched skyscrapers fade into the gray distance. Each turn of the wheels felt like another piece of her old life falling away. The Cross estate rose out of the mist like something from another century, a mansion of stone and glass, perched above the Atlantic cliffs. Gates taller than any she had ever seen opened slowly as the car approached. Inside, fountains shimmered, and the sound of waves crashed faintly below. Mrs. Keller, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, greeted her at the door. Welcome, Mrs. Cross, she said politely, though her tone carried no warmth. Follow me, please. Lena's footsteps echoed against the marble floor, as she passed halls lined with portraits and chandeliers that looked too grand to touch. Every surface gleamed, every scent of polish and ocean salt mixing in the air. Her room was large, elegant, and empty. On the dresser sat a single box, tied with a silver ribbon. A note in Ethan's handwriting lay beside it. Wear this for dinner. Inside, she found a simple black dress, sleek, expensive, nothing like the clothes she owned. She hesitated but obeyed. At 7 sharp, she entered the dining hall. Ethan was already seated at the far end of the table, a candle flickering between them. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint clink of silverware. You are punctual, he said without looking up. I thought you said not to be late. He allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. I see you can follow instructions. That will make things easier. For the next half hour, they ate in near silence. Every question she wanted to ask, why her, what he wanted, who he really was, remained trapped behind her lips. When the plates were cleared, Ethan finally spoke again. Tomorrow morning, you will accompany me to the office. The world must believe our marriage is real. I will expect you to act accordingly. Lena nodded, unsure if she had just agreed to live a lie or stepped into something much darker than she understood. As she rose from the table, Ethan's voice followed her softly, almost as if testing her courage. Good night, Mrs. Cross. She turned at the doorway. Good night, Mr. Cross. Oh, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes, not cruelty, not arrogance, but a shadow of something human, quickly buried beneath the mask of power. The next morning arrived with the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs outside the Cross estate. Pale light crept through the tall windows of Lena's room, soft but cold, as if even the sun hesitated to touch this place. She lay awake long before dawn, staring at the ceiling, the events of the last 2 days looping endlessly in her mind. She had signed a contract to marry a man she barely knew, a man who could erase a fortune with a single phone call. Every heartbeat reminded her that she was no longer Lena Parker, the woman who worked 2 jobs to pay rent. She was now Mrs. Cross, wife to a millionaire whose kindness was as controlled as his cruelty. At 6 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Mrs. Keller entered, carrying a tray of breakfast that looked more like a painting than a meal. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross," the housekeeper said. Her voice was calm, efficient. "Mr. Cross requests that you be ready to leave for the city by 8. Lena pushed herself up, rubbing her eyes. "Leave? For the company?" "That is correct. You are to accompany him today. The car will be waiting." Mrs. Keller left as quietly as she had entered, the door clicking shut behind her. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly. She wanted to believe this was all temporary, that she could survive the 12 months and return to her old life. But as she looked around the room, the velvet curtains, the marble fireplace, the view of endless ocean, she realized that nothing about this world belonged to her. 2 hours later, she stepped into the limousine beside Ethan Cross. He was already dressed in a charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted, a cup of coffee balanced in one hand. He gave her a brief glance, no greeting, no smile. "You look adequate," he said finally, eyes returning to his tablet. She bit her tongue to stop herself from replying. The ride to the city was long and silent. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic crash of the ocean fading behind them. When they arrived at Cross Enterprises, the glass tower loomed above like a monument to ambition. Cameras flashed the moment Ethan stepped out. Reporters calling his name. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, his expression perfectly composed. Lena followed, and the moment she appeared beside him, whispers rippled through the crowd. "That is her," someone murmured. "The new Mrs. Cross." Ethan's hand brushed her lower back, a calculated gesture for the cameras, and she forced a smile. Inside the lobby, marble floors reflected the morning light. Employees straightened at the sight of their boss, eyes darting from him to the unfamiliar woman at his side. In the elevator, silence pressed between them. Lena broke it first. "Do they know the truth?" Ethan did not look at her. "They know what I want them to know. That is enough." When the elevator doors opened, she followed him into an office that overlooked the city. The space was vast, sleek furniture, muted colors, walls lined with awards. A single framed photograph stood on his desk. A much younger Ethan, shaking hands with his late father. Lena stood by the window, staring at the skyline. "You built all this yourself?" He set his briefcase down. "Hard work, precision, and the refusal to trust anyone. That is how empires survive." She turned toward him. "That sounds lonely." He met her gaze for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Loneliness is a price. People pay it willingly for power." Before she could respond, the office door opened, and a man in a dark suit entered. "Mr. Cross, the press conference begins in 15 minutes. He glanced at Lena with mild curiosity before leaving again. Ethan picked up a folder from his desk and handed it to her. "You will stand beside me. Say nothing unless I ask you to. Smile when I speak about family. Can you manage that?" "I think so," she said quietly. The conference room was filled with cameras, journalists, and the faint buzz of microphones. Ethan's voice carried with calm authority as he addressed the press about a new charitable foundation. Every word was measured, rehearsed, flawless. When a reporter asked about his sudden marriage, Ethan rested a hand on Lena's shoulder. "My personal life is no longer of public concern," he said smoothly. "But my wife and I share a common belief in building something that lasts." Flashbulbs exploded, and Lena smiled on cue. For a moment, their act looked real, his tone protective, her expression devoted. But when the conference ended and the cameras lowered, the distance between them returned like a closing door. Back in the limousine, the sky had turned gray again. Rain tapped against the windows as they drove home. "You handled yourself well," Ethan said finally. "Better than I expected." "Thank you," she replied, "though I was not sure if I was your wife or your employee." His lips curved slightly. "There is no difference. Both positions require discipline." Lena looked out the window, her reflection fading into the rain. "You must have everything you want, Mr. Cross. Power, money, control. He glanced at her, his tone softer than before. Everyone has something they cannot buy. Even me. Oh? She turned toward him, surprised, but his gaze had already shifted to the window, as if the confession had slipped out by accident. When they returned to the estate that evening, the ocean wind had picked up, tossing waves against the rocks below. Lena stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the stone driveway. Mrs. Keller appeared in the doorway with a faint smile. "Dinner will be served at 7, Mrs. Cross. Mr. Cross has a meeting in the study." Lena nodded, but before entering, she turned to glance at the man who now held her life in his hands. Ethan stood by the car, speaking into his phone, his voice calm, confident, unreachable. And yet, for a brief second, when he looked up and their eyes met across the gray courtyard, something flickered, something fragile, almost human before he turned away and vanished into the mansion's shadows. That night, as Lena stood by her window watching lightning over the sea, she whispered to herself, "One day down, 364 to go." The storm answered her with a roll of thunder that sounded almost like a warning. The night was long and restless. The wind howled across the cliffs, carrying the faint scent of salt through the open balcony doors. Lena lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her new room. Every tick of the clock reminded her that she was living in a stranger's house, bound to a man who treated their marriage like a transaction. When morning arrived, the ocean mist covered the windows in a thin silver haze. She dressed in silence and went downstairs. The dining hall, large enough to host an army, felt empty with only 2 people sitting at opposite ends. Ethan was already there, reading the morning reports with a cup of black coffee beside him. "Good morning," Lena said softly. He did not look up. "Sit." "You are late." Her eyes flicked toward the clock. "It is 7:15. "You said breakfast was at 7. "I do not measure time in minutes," he replied. "I measure it in precision." She bit her lip and sat down. The servants moved silently, placing her plate of eggs and toast in front of her. For a while, the only sound was the clinking of silverware. Finally, Ethan spoke without lifting his eyes from the documents. "You handled yourself well yesterday. The board is satisfied. The press believes our marriage is genuine." Lena nodded. "I suppose that means I passed the first test." He glanced at her then, his gray eyes sharp. "This is not a test, Mrs. Cross. It is a performance. You must remember your role at all times." "I understand," she said quietly, though a hint of defiance colored her tone. "I have been pretending to be fine for most of my life. I will manage." Ethan's lips twitched, almost a smile, but he hid it behind the rim of his cup. After breakfast, Mrs. Keller approached Lena with a folder in hand. "Mr. Cross asked that you review the schedule for tonight. You will attend a small dinner with his business associates. It is formal. The car leaves at 6. Lena took the folder, scanning the details. Her heart tightened at the word formal. The last time she had attended an event like that, she was serving drinks, not being introduced as anyone's wife. She spent the afternoon preparing, guided by one of the house staff. The gown chosen for her was deep emerald green, simple but elegant. The mirror reflected a version of herself. She barely recognized hair pinned neatly, eyes defined, shoulders bare under soft light. When Ethan appeared at the door, dressed in a black suit, even the air in the room seemed to still. He looked at her for a brief second before saying, "That will do." "That will do," she repeated, lifting an eyebrow. His gaze softened slightly. "You look appropriate." "I will take that as a compliment," she said with a faint smile. The drive to the hotel was silent, except for the sound of the rain returning, tapping softly on the car roof. When they arrived, flashes from cameras greeted them again. Lena felt her pulse race, but Ethan's hand found hers steady, firm, guiding her through the chaos as if they had done this 1,000 times. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glimmered like captured stars. Waiters moved in perfect rhythm, and laughter echoed from every corner. Ethan leaned close and whispered, "Stay near me. Speak little. Smile often." She nodded. The evening unfolded like a scene from someone else's life. She shook hands, exchanged polite words, smiled when necessary. Yet beneath the surface, her mind was spinning. These people spoke in figures and contracts she barely understood. Midway through the evening, A tall man with silver hair approached. "Ethan," he greeted warmly, then turned to Lena. "And this must be your lovely wife. I was beginning to think she was a myth." Ethan placed a hand on the small of her back. "Lena, this is Charles Whitman. We have been partners for years." Charles smiled and offered his hand. "You have a strong one, Ethan. I see why the press calls you lucky." Lena shook his hand politely. "Luck has nothing to do with him," she said. "He makes his own." Charles laughed. "Smart woman." Ethan's gaze lingered on her, a trace of surprise flickering across his face. It was the first time she had spoken in public with such quiet confidence. Later, as the orchestra began to play, a photographer approached. "Mr. Cross, may I get a picture of you and your wife for the charity column?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He turned toward Lena, placing a hand lightly on her waist. The flash went off, freezing the image of them together, his cold composure, beside her uncertain grace. After the dinner, they stepped outside into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement shining under the streetlights. Lena exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all evening. "You did well," Ethan said. "You played your part." She looked at him, her voice calm but firm. "I was not playing. I was surviving." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. Survival and performance are the same thing in this world. The car arrived, and they rode back in silence. When they reached the estate, Lena began to climb the stairs toward her room. But before she reached the landing, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Lena." She turned. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands in his pockets. "You are not what I expected." She hesitated. "Is that a compliment?" He gave a faint smile. "I do not give compliments. Good night." "Good night, Mr. Cross," she replied softly. When she entered her room, she looked at the reflection in the mirror again. For the first time, she realized the truth. She was no longer afraid of Ethan Cross. She was beginning to understand him. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea, but in her chest, something quieter stirred a question she could not yet name. The following morning came with the soft roar of waves against the cliffs and the smell of rain still clinging to the air. The Cross estate stood silent, wrapped in gray mist. Inside, servants moved quietly through the long marble halls, their voices barely more than whispers. Lena woke to the sound of a knock on her door. When she opened it, Mrs. Keller stood outside with her usual composure. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross. Mr. Cross has already left for the city. He will return late this evening. He requested that you make yourself comfortable in the library until lunch. He also said," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "that you should begin learning the household schedule. It is expected of the lady of the house." "Of course," Lena replied softly. "Thank you, Mrs. Keller." When the door closed, she sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, trying to steady herself. She still felt like a guest in someone else's world. But the reality was clearer. Every day this mansion, this title, this life, were now hers, even if borrowed. By mid-morning, she wandered through the corridors, tracing her fingers across the polished wood of the stair rail. Every painting, every sculpture, every chandelier gleamed with the weight of history and money. Yet the house felt empty, almost too perfect, like a museum that had forgotten it once belonged to people. The library was enormous, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling. Thousands of books stood in perfect order. She ran her fingers along the spines until she found one that caught her eye. "The Art of Building Empires," she smiled faintly. "Of course he would own this," she murmured. She settled into a leather chair near the window, but before she could start reading, a voice interrupted. "You should try the second shelf on the left," a woman said. "That one actually has stories worth reading." Lena turned. A tall woman with dark hair and striking red lipstick stood at the doorway. She was elegant, poised, and unmistakably confident. "I'm sorry, I did not know anyone else was here," Lena said, standing quickly. The woman smiled thinly. "You must be the new Mrs. Cross. I am Sophia Grant. I used to work closely with Ethan." Lena felt the words linger in the air. "Work closely?" she repeated carefully. Sophia's smile grew. In every sense of the word. She stepped closer, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Ethan and I built this company together. I know him better than anyone ever will." Lena met her gaze calmly. Then you must know he does not like people exaggerating his business. Sophia laughed softly. Oh, you are brave. But do not mistake this arrangement for something real. Ethan Cross does not love Mrs. Parker. He acquires. You, my dear, are simply his latest investment. Lena's stomach twisted, but she refused to look away. Thank you for the advice, she said evenly. But I do not take financial advice from strangers. Sophia's eyes flashed with amusement. You have spirit. I will give you that. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. Enjoy your stay. I doubt it will last long. When she was gone, the room felt colder. Lena sank back into the chair, her hands trembling slightly. She knew Sophia's words were meant to wound her, but instead they ignited something else, curiosity. Who was Ethan Cross before all of this? What had made him so careful, so guarded? By the time Ethan returned that evening, the house was quiet again. He stepped into the dining room, his jacket still damp from the rain. Lena waited for him, dressed simply in a soft gray sweater. Dinner was already served. You had a visitor today, she said after a moment. He looked up sharply. Who? Sophia Grant. His fork froze midway to his plate. What did she say? She said she used to work closely with you. His jaw tightened. You should not believe everything people tell you. I do not, Lena said calmly. But I do believe that she still cares about you, or at least about the power you represent. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. And what about you, Mrs. Cross? Do you care about power? She met his gaze steadily. No. I care about truth. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. Then Ethan spoke quietly, almost to himself. Truth is expensive. Most people cannot afford it. After dinner, he retreated to his study, but his usual focus seemed to waver. He stared at his computer screen, then at the rain sliding down the window pane. Sophia's visit had unsettled him. She was not supposed to come here, not now, not ever. Across the hall, Lena stood at her own window, watching the same storm. She thought about what Sophia had said, that Ethan only acquired, never loved. But something about the man she saw at dinner, the flicker of restraint in his eyes, told her there was more to him than the ruthless millionaire everyone described. Later that night, as she passed by his study on the way to her room, she paused. The door was open just enough for her to see him sitting at the desk, head bowed, one hand pressed against his temple as if fighting something invisible. For a moment, he looked nothing like the man who ruled a corporation. He looked human. Lena quietly turned away, closing the door behind her without a sound. She walked back to her room, whispering to herself, if this is just a performance, then why does it already feel real? Outside, lightning flashed over the ocean again, and somewhere deep inside the mansion, the sound of rain mingled with the slow, uncertain rhythm of two hearts that were beginning to change. The next day began under a quiet sky. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and pale. The Cross estate glimmered in the soft morning light, but the silence that filled its halls was heavier than before. Lena sat in the breakfast room alone. A pot of tea steamed beside her, untouched. Mrs. Keller entered a moment later, holding a small notepad. Mr. Cross left early again, she said. He will not return until late evening. There are meetings downtown. Lena nodded. He seems busier than usual. Mrs. Keller's expression remained polite, but her tone carried something careful. He has been distracted since yesterday. You may not know this, but Miss Grant was once his closest advisor. Her reappearance is not something he welcomes. Lena folded her hands. She said they built the company together. That is partly true, Mrs. Keller said. But when ambition grows faster than loyalty, it always ends badly. No. The older woman turned to leave but stopped at the door. Mrs. Cross, if I may, this house is large, but walls here have ears. Be cautious whom you trust. After she left, Lena looked out the window. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, calm but deceptive. She felt the same way about Ethan, distant, composed, yet full of unseen depths. Later that morning, unable to stay idle, she decided to explore the west wing of the mansion, a part she had not yet entered. The corridor there was darker, lined with paintings older than the estate itself. As she moved quietly, she noticed a faint hum voices, mechanical clicking coming from behind one of the doors. It was slightly open. She hesitated, then pushed gently. Inside was a small control room filled with monitors and blinking lights. Security footage from every corner of the house played silently across the screens. She froze when she saw herself reading in the library, walking in the garden, even sitting at the breakfast table. Footsteps sounded behind her. Curiosity is a dangerous habit, Mrs. Cross. Ethan's voice was calm but carried the edge of command. He stepped into the room, his presence filling it like a shadow. "I did not mean to intrude," Lena said quickly. "I was exploring. I did not realize that you were being watched." He folded his arms. "You signed a contract that binds you to my world. In my world, nothing is left to chance." Her eyes flashed with quiet anger. "Surveillance is not control, Ethan. It is fear." He studied her face, his jaw tightening. "Fear keeps people alive. Fear also destroys trust," she said. Something flickered in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or something close to it. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the machines filled the silence between them. Finally, Ethan stepped forward and pressed a button. The monitors went black. "You are right," he said quietly. "I will limit the surveillance inside the main quarters. But outside of that, the system stays." Lena nodded slowly. "That is all I ask." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Lena," he said, softer now. "Sophia was here for a reason. She wants something. Something I built years ago. Stay away from her." "I can take care of myself," she replied. His tone darkened. "You should not have to." "No." For a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink around them. Then she stepped past him, her voice calm. "Maybe you should tell me what you are afraid of, Mr. Cross. Then maybe I would understand." He did not answer. That evening, the storm returned. Wind rattled the windows, and thunder rolled over the cliffs. Lena was reading in the parlor when she heard footsteps again. Ethan stood at the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I did not expect you to still be awake," he said. "Neither did I," she replied. "Storms keep me restless." He crossed the room and stopped by the window, looking out at the sea. "I used to like storms. They reminded me that the world does not bend to anyone's will." Lena set her book aside. "And now? Now I see them as distractions, noise I cannot control." She smiled faintly. "You cannot control the ocean, Ethan. Or people." He turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "You think I do not know that? I think you are afraid of losing what you cannot own," she said softly. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Then he stepped back, his voice low. "Go to bed, Lena." She stood slowly. "Good night, Mr. Cross." He watched her leave, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. When the door finally closed, Ethan exhaled, his hand brushing against the glass as lightning flashed outside. In her room, Lena could still feel his gaze lingering in her mind. Beneath all his rules and contracts, there was a man who no longer trusted himself. And beneath all her defiance, there was something she did not want to admit, a growing curiosity about who Ethan Cross truly was before the world turned him to stone. As the storm raged through the night, the mansion seemed alive with secrets. And for the first time since the day she arrived, Lena realized that her story inside these walls had only just begun. The following day, sunlight returned to the coast, though the air still carried the chill of the passing storm. The Cross estate looked calm again, but inside, the silence between Ethan and Lena had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers, it was the silence of two people aware of each other, unsure what to do with that awareness. Lena spent the morning in the garden. The air smelled of wet grass and salt, the sky bright and blue. For the first time since her arrival, she felt something close to peace. The roses, heavy with dew, reminded her of her mother's small garden back home. She knelt to touch one of the petals when a voice behind her broke the quiet. "You should not be on your knees, Mrs. Cross. It gives the staff the wrong idea." She turned. Ethan stood by the stone archway, dressed in a light gray suit, no tie, the wind lifting his hair slightly. "I did not realize flowers could be a threat to your reputation," she said, standing. "They are not," he replied, a faint trace of amusement in his tone. "But appearances matter in my world, even here." She brushed the dirt from her hands. "Then your world must be exhausting." He looked at her for a moment, then walked toward her. "It is." The simple honesty of the word caught her off guard. For a brief second, he did not look like the man who signed contracts that could change lives. He looked like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "Would you like to walk with me?" he asked suddenly. She hesitated. "Now?" "Yes. You might as well see the parts of this place that are worth seeing." They followed the stone path down toward the cliffs. The wind was strong, carrying the cries of distant gulls. Below, the Atlantic stretched endless and gray. Ethan stopped near the edge, where the land curved into a narrow overlook. "My father built this house," he said. "He believed success should be visible. Every window, every wall, meant to remind people of what he owned." Lena glanced at him. "And what about you? Do you believe that?" He smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. "I used to. Then I realized ownership does not bring peace. It only replaces one kind of emptiness with another." She studied him quietly. "You talk like someone who regrets building his empire." "I do not regret it," he said. "But I sometimes wonder what it cost me." They stood together in silence. The wind whipped through her hair, and she had to raise her voice slightly to be heard. "If you could start again, would you do it differently?" He turned his gaze toward the horizon. "If I answered honestly, I would not like the man I would become." His words hung between them, fragile and heavy. For the first time, Lena saw the crack behind his composure, the shadow of someone who had given up something human to gain something powerful. When they returned to the house, the staff was setting the table for lunch. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "I have to go to the city," he said. A board meeting was moved forward. "Will you be back tonight?" "Maybe." She watched him leave, a strange ache forming in her chest. It was not longing, not yet, but a kind of concern she did not want to name. The afternoon drifted slowly. Lena wandered through the house until she found herself near Ethan's study. The door was ajar, and on the desk lay a folder marked Cross Foundation. Inside were photographs of hospitals, schools, and orphanages, projects the company funded quietly without publicity. At the bottom of the folder was a newspaper clipping from years ago. The headline read, "Young engineer Ethan Cross survives tragic car crash. Business partner found dead." Her fingers trembled as she read. The date was nearly a decade earlier. The name of the man who had died was Jonathan Grant, Sophia's brother. Suddenly, everything began to make sense. Her resentment, her bitterness, the way she looked at Ethan as if he had taken something that belonged to her. That evening, when Ethan returned, Lena waited for him in the study. He paused when he saw her holding the folder. "You have been reading my files," he said quietly. "I found it by accident," she replied. "You could have told me the truth." He closed the door behind him, his face unreadable. "The truth changes nothing. The accident happened. People died. I lived." "It changes everything," she said. "You were in that car. You survived, and she lost her brother. Do you ever wonder if that is why she hates you?" "I do not wonder," he said, his voice sharp. "I know." Lena stepped closer. "Then why do you let her near your company? Why let her near you?" His hands clenched at his sides. "Because guilt can be more binding than any contract." The silence that followed was heavy. The clock ticked softly in the background, marking the seconds between them. "You cannot keep punishing yourself forever," she said finally. He looked at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "And you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved, Mrs. Cross." She met his gaze. "Maybe not, but you are wrong if you think you have to live like this." He turned away, his voice low. "Go to bed, Lena." But as she walked toward the door, she heard his voice again, so quiet she almost thought she imagined it. "Thank you," he said, "for caring enough to ask." She stopped, looking back at him. He did not meet her eyes, but for the first time, his mask had slipped entirely. The ruthless millionaire she had married looked almost human, broken, haunted, and very much alive. That night, the wind returned, whispering against the windows. Lena stood in her room, thinking of the man down the hall, the one who lived surrounded by walls of glass, but still could not see his own heart. The next morning, the Cross estate was alive with quiet preparation. Staff moved through the halls, arranging flower displays and setting silver trays along the dining tables. Lena stood by the window of her room, watching the sea stretch endlessly beneath a pale sky. Today, Ethan had told her, they would attend a charity gala, an annual event hosted by his company. It was her first public appearance as Mrs. Cross. And though she had faced cameras before, this time felt different. This time, she carried not only his name but his reputation. Mrs. Keller entered carrying a garment bag. "Your gown for tonight, Mrs. Cross. Mr. Cross's tailor sent it early this morning." "Oh." Lena unzipped the bag. Inside was a gown the color of midnight, sleek, simple, yet impossibly elegant. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Mrs. Keller gave a small nod. "It will photograph well under the chandeliers." He thought of everything. Lena smiled faintly. Of course he did. By the time the car arrived that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The drive into the city was long and silent. Ethan sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, dressed in a black suit that fit him with effortless precision. The glow from the dashboard traced the sharp lines of his face. "You do not seem nervous," he said finally, glancing at her. "I learned a long time ago that fear does not help in front of people," she replied. "Besides, I survived your contract. How hard can a dinner party be?" A small smile flickered across his lips, the kind that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You may be surprised." When they arrived at the Grand Meridian Hotel, photographers crowded the entrance, flashes breaking across the night. Ethan stepped out first, offering his hand to her. Cameras clicked wildly as she took it and stepped into the light. The ballroom was vast, shimmering with crystal chandeliers. A live orchestra played soft music. Guests in glittering attire turned as they entered, whispering. Lena felt the weight of 100 eyes, but she stood tall beside Ethan. His hand rested lightly on her back, steadying her, grounding her. Charles Whitman was there again, smiling broadly. "Ethan, Mrs. Cross." The power couple finally makes an appearance. "Good evening, Charles," Ethan said smoothly. Charles shook Lena's hand. "Mrs. Cross, you look radiant. You must tell me your secret." "Endurance," she said with a polite smile. "And tea." Charles laughed loudly, clearly charmed. "Ethan, you married a clever one." Ethan's eyes met hers briefly, something warm flickering behind the cool exterior. "Yes," he said. "I did." The evening unfolded in layers, speeches, toasts, polite conversation. Lena handled them all with calm grace. When someone asked about her charity interests, she spoke about education and medical aid, her voice steady but heartfelt. The guests listened. Even Ethan seemed surprised by her poise. During dinner, she leaned closer to him. "You could have told me this was a fundraiser for hospitals," she whispered. "I did not think it mattered," he replied. "I did not expect you to speak." "Well, you should start expecting it," she said quietly, and for the first time, he did not argue. Midway through the gala, Sophia appeared. She wore silver, her confidence unmistakable. When she approached their table, the temperature in the room seemed to shift. "Ethan," she greeted smoothly, then turned to Lena. "Mrs. Cross, you are becoming quite the sensation." Lena's tone was calm but firm. "I only came to support the foundation. Fame is not my goal." Sophia's red lips curved. "Oh, I am sure it is not. Though it does seem you enjoy playing the part of a devoted wife." Ethan's voice cut in, quiet but sharp. "Sophia, this is neither the time nor the place." Sophia tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "Of course. But tell me, Ethan, how long do you think the world will believe in fairy tales?" Lena's hand tightened around her glass, but she said nothing. She refused to give Sophia the reaction she wanted. Instead, she stood and smiled politely. "Excuse me, I need some air." Outside on the balcony, the city stretched out in gold and silver lights. The night air was cool, cleansing. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps. Ethan joined her, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "She should not have said that," he said. "She only said what she wanted you to hear," Lena replied. "You cannot let her pull you back into the past." He turned toward her. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple, but it is necessary," she said. "You cannot spend your life punishing yourself for surviving." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "You are the first person who has ever said that to me. Maybe no one else there read." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes, the calm steadiness of her voice. For a fleeting second, the space between them seemed to shift. The sound of applause from inside broke the moment. Someone was announcing the auction results. Ethan straightened, his composure sliding back into place. "We should go back in," Lena nodded. "Yes, but remember what I said." Back inside, the lights glittered like stars. Ethan placed a bid on a children's hospital renovation, an amount so large that gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed again, but this time, Lena saw what others could not: the quiet act of redemption hidden beneath his controlled exterior. As the gala ended, they walked toward the waiting car. Reporters called out questions. Ethan ignored them, but one of them shouted, "Mr. Cross, people are saying your wife is changing you. Any comment?" Ethan paused, glanced at Lena, then said, "Maybe she is reminding me what it means to be human." The words stunned her. In the car, as the city lights faded behind them, Lena looked out the window, her reflection trembling in the glass. Something had shifted tonight, not just in how the world saw them, but in how Ethan saw her. Outside, the night was calm again. Inside, two people sat in silence, no longer strangers, but not yet something else, each wondering what line had been crossed, and whether crossing it was the beginning or the end of everything. The next morning, the mansion was quiet except for the faint cry of seagulls and the distant hum of waves. The light was soft and gold, slipping gently through the curtains of Lena's room. She woke earlier than usual, her thoughts restless after the gala. The memory of Ethan's words lingered in her mind. Maybe she is reminding me what it means to be human. Those words had not sounded rehearsed. They had not sounded like something a man like Ethan Cross would say in front of cameras. They had sounded real. She dressed simply and went downstairs, her footsteps echoing through the vast halls. The dining room was empty, except for a folded newspaper placed neatly beside her plate. The headline on the front page read, "The Cross Couple Steal the Spotlight at Charity Gala." Beneath it, a photograph of her and Ethan, standing together under the chandelier, smiling as if the world had paused around them. Lena sighed. The image looked beautiful but false, two people playing roles that everyone else wanted to believe in. Yet deep down, she knew there had been a moment last night that had not been acting. Mrs. Keller entered carrying a tray of coffee. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross." "Mr. Cross had an early meeting. He will return later this afternoon." Lena nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Keller. Was everything at the event last night all right?" Mrs. Keller hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "The staff who accompanied you said it was a success. But success in Mr. Cross's world is never simple. The press loved you. That means someone else will not." Lena looked up. "Sophia." Mrs. Keller nodded slightly. "She does not lose gracefully." Later that day, Lena decided to walk along the cliffs behind the estate. The sky was bright, the wind sharp. She found peace there, the rhythm of the sea was steady, unjudging. She picked up a small stone and turned it in her hand, the cool surface grounding her. A voice startled her from behind. "I was beginning to think you had run away." She turned to see Ethan approaching, his coat moving in the wind. "I thought you had a meeting," she said. "It ended early," he replied. "The city is noisy. I needed quiet." Lena smiled faintly. "Then you came to the right place." He stopped beside her, staring out at the ocean. "The press thinks we are perfect," he said after a moment. "A perfect marriage, a perfect empire. But they do not see the cracks. They see what you allow them to see," she answered. He glanced at her. "And what do you see?" She hesitated. "I see a man who pretends not to care but does. I see someone who carries guilt like armor. And I see someone who is afraid that if he lets go, everything he built will fall apart." He exhaled slowly, looking down at the waves. "You see too much, Lena." "Maybe," she said softly. "But someone has to." They stood in silence for a while. The wind tangled her hair, and when she reached to brush it aside, his hand moved instinctively, catching a strand that had blown across her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan dropped his hand quickly, stepping back. "You should go inside. It is cold." But his voice lacked its usual certainty. That afternoon, a courier arrived at the mansion. Mrs. Keller delivered a sealed envelope to Ethan's study. "This came for you, sir," marked confidential. Ethan opened it and scanned the papers inside. His expression hardened. "Who delivered this?" "A man from the city," Mrs. Keller said. He did not give a name. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You may go." When she left, he spread the documents across his desk. Inside were photographs grainy, shadowed but clear enough to see. They showed him and Lena at the gala, on the balcony, standing close under the city lights. The envelope also contained a short note in neat handwriting. "You cannot hide the past forever." He knew who had sent it. That evening, Lena noticed his mood had changed. He spoke little during dinner, his tone sharp when he did. When she asked if something was wrong, he said only, "Nothing that concerns you." Oh, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the restless tapping of his fingers on the table. After dinner, she followed him into the study. "Something is wrong," she said. "I can tell." Ethan turned toward her, his jaw tight. "You do not need to worry about my business." "This is not business," she said. "This is personal. Tell me the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, then held up the photographs. "Sophia is playing games again. She wants to remind me that everything I touch can be used against me." Lena stepped closer. "Then she is wrong, because this time she is not dealing with the same man." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You think I have changed?" "I think you are changing," she said quietly, "and that scares her more than anything." Ethan stared at her, the edge in his expression softening. "You are not afraid of me anymore, are you?" Lena shook her head. "No, I'm afraid for you." "Oh." He said nothing for several seconds. Then, with a quiet sigh, he set the photographs on fire in the small fireplace behind his desk. The paper curled and turned to ash, the images disappearing into smoke. "You should not have to live like this," she said softly. He watched the flames fade. "And you should not have to care." "But you do." Lena met his gaze, steady and calm. "I made a promise when I signed that contract to stay for 1 year. But what happens between us during that year? That was never in the fine print." Ethan's expression changed. Something unspoken flickered in his eyes, caught between disbelief and understanding. The clock struck 9, echoing through the room. Neither of them moved. The silence was no longer cold. It was charged with the weight of everything they had not said. Outside, the wind swept across the cliffs again, but inside the mansion, something else was stirring an emotion too fragile to name and too powerful to ignore. The morning after the photographs burned, the mansion felt strangely lighter, as if some invisible weight had lifted from its walls. The storm that had battered the cliffs for 2 days had passed, leaving behind a clear blue sky and sunlight glinting on the wet stones. For the first time since her arrival, Lena woke to the sound of birds instead of thunder. She dressed quietly and made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Keller was arranging breakfast. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross," the housekeeper greeted her. "Mr. Cross asked that you join him in the garden after breakfast. He mentioned something about a meeting." Lena hesitated. "A meeting? On a Sunday?" Mrs. Keller gave a small, knowing smile. "When it comes to Mr. Cross, business never truly rests." After breakfast, Lena followed the path through the rose garden. She found Ethan sitting at a wrought iron table, a laptop open beside a pot of untouched coffee. The sea wind brushed across his hair, softening the usual perfection of his appearance. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. He looked up, his tone even but quieter than usual. "I have to travel to the city for a few days. There are negotiations that cannot wait. I wanted to discuss something before I leave." Lena sat down across from him. "Go on." He closed the laptop. "While I am gone, you will likely receive visitors. Reporters, perhaps, or someone from Sophia's circle. Do not engage. Do not believe anything they say. They will try to use you to get to me." "Why now?" she asked. He paused, his expression hardening. "Because I am about to make a decision that will cost some people more than they can afford to lose." Lena leaned forward slightly. "And what about you? What will it cost you?" Ethan gave a faint, humorless smile. "It already has." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. Then Lena spoke softly. "You do not have to fight alone all the time, Ethan." His gaze met hers, steady but distant. "It is easier that way." "Easier," she said, "but lonelier." He looked away, as if the truth in her words had struck too close. Then he stood, straightening his jacket. "I will leave after lunch. The car will take me to the helipad." She nodded, watching him walk back toward the house. There was something in his stride determination mixed with fatigue that made her realize how heavy his world truly was. That afternoon, Lena wandered through the empty halls. Without Ethan's presence, the mansion felt too quiet, almost hollow. She found herself in the library again, drawn to the same shelves where she had first met Sophia. The sunlight poured in through the tall windows, illuminating the dust that danced in the air. On the desk lay an unfinished chess game. Two pieces, black king and white queen, stood facing each other across the board. She smiled faintly, tracing the edge of the white queen with her fingertips. "You never play to win, do you, Ethan?" she whispered. "You play not to lose." By evening, the staff had gone about their duties, leaving Lena alone on the terrace. The ocean below glowed orange under the setting Sunday. She thought about the past few weeks, the contract, the tension, the moments that had begun to feel less like obligation and more like something fragile and real. She was lost in thought when her phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Cross," a woman's voice said smoothly. "You do not know me, but we have mutual interests." "Who is this?" Lena asked cautiously. "I think you already know. Let us just say I am calling out of concern. You are living in a world that is not yours. Men like Ethan Cross do not change, no matter how much you want them to." Lena's grip on the phone tightened. "Sophia." There was a soft laugh on the other end. "Smart girl. Tell me, has he mentioned my brother? Has he told you what really happened?" "I know about the accident," Lena said. "I know he carries that guilt." "Guilt?" Sophia's tone sharpened. "He calls it guilt? He walked away with everything. My brother died trying to save his life. And Ethan built an empire from the ashes." Lena's voice stayed calm, though her pulse quickened. "He does not speak of it to protect you as much as himself. But I do not believe he ever meant for it to happen." "Believe whatever helps you sleep," Sophia said coldly. "But when the truth comes out, and it will remember, I warned you." The call ended. Lena stared at the screen, her reflection faint against the black glass. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. She did not know what Sophia planned, but she knew this was no longer about jealousy. It was about revenge. Later that night, she sat by the fireplace, unable to rest. Mrs. Keller entered quietly with a cup of tea. "You should get some sleep," the older woman said gently. "You look troubled." Lena forced a smile. "It is nothing, just thinking too much." Mrs. Keller hesitated. "If I may, Mrs. Cross, sometimes thinking too much is how we lose peace. Whatever it is, remember that not all storms come to destroy. Some come to clear the air." When the house grew quiet again, Lena went to the window. The moon hung above the sea like a silver coin. Somewhere out there, Ethan was flying toward another battlefield of his own making, unaware that a different war was brewing behind him. She pressed her hand against the glass. "Please," she whispered, "do not let her win." The wind rose, sweeping through the cliffs and rattling the shutters, as if the mansion itself had heard her plea. The night that followed would not be peaceful, but it would mark the beginning of a change that neither Ethan nor Lena could stop. The wind carried a chill across the coastline that morning, the kind that hinted something unseen was beginning to shift. The Cross estate felt unusually still, as if holding its breath. Lena stood by the window in the library, her reflection framed by the pale light of dawn. She had not slept. Sophia's voice from the phone call echoed through her mind again and again, sharp, cold, and full of threat. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. Mrs. Keller entered carrying a tray with tea. "You are awake early again," she said gently. "You should try to rest." Lena shook her head. "I could not sleep. I keep thinking about the call I received last night." "Mrs." Keller paused, setting down the tray. "A call? From whom?" Lena hesitated before answering. "Sophia Grant. She said the past was coming back, and that Ethan cannot hide from it." The older woman's expression tightened. "Miss Grant has a dangerous way of mixing truth and poison together. You must not let her words plant fear where it does not belong." "She sounded certain," Lena said softly, "as if she knows something I do not." Mrs. Keller's eyes softened. "Perhaps she does. But that does not mean she holds the whole story. You and Mr. Cross must learn that together." When Mrs. Keller left, Lena turned back to the window. The sea was calm, but she felt the air shifting like the moment before a storm. She knew Sophia was not finished. By late afternoon, Ethan called from the city. His voice came through the line clear but strained. "Lena, are you all right?" "I am fine," she said. "You sound tired." "It has been a long day," he replied. "But there is something you should know. Sophia has been in contact with a journalist from the Financial Tribune. They are preparing a story about the crash from years ago." Her heart sank. "The one involving her brother?" "Yes. She is claiming I caused it intentionally." Lena's breath caught. "That is not true." "I know," he said, his tone quiet. "But the world does not always care about truth. They care about what bleeds." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I will handle it," he said simply. "But I need you to stay calm. No statements, no interviews. If anyone approaches you, send them to my office." "All right," she agreed. "Just come home soon, Ethan." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low sigh. "I will," he said. "I promise." That night, the first headline appeared online. "The Untold Tragedy. Behind the Cross Fortune." The article hinted at secrets buried in the past, painting Ethan as an ambitious young businessman who had sacrificed others on his rise to power. By morning, the story had spread to every major outlet. Reporters began arriving at the gates of the estate, cameras flashing through the iron bars. Lena could hear their voices even from the second floor. "Mrs. Cross! Do you have a comment on the allegations? Did your husband ever tell you what happened that night?" She stayed inside, curtains drawn, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the endless flood of articles. Each one twisted the story further, turning Ethan from a survivor into a villain. By the afternoon, her phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan's assistant. "Mrs. Cross, Mr. Cross has requested that you prepare to leave the estate temporarily, for your safety." "Oh, my safety?" Lena repeated. "From what?" "From the press," the assistant said carefully. "And from anyone who might use you to reach him." Lena hesitated. "No, I am not running away. If he wants me to stand beside him, then that is what I will do." When she ended the call, she stood motionless for a long time. She could not explain why, but the thought of leaving the mansion felt wrong. This was her home now, even if it had begun as an illusion. As the sky darkened, a car pulled up to the gate. Through the rain, she saw Sophia step out, wearing a long coat and an expression that was half pity, half triumph. Lena met her at the entrance. "You should not be here," she said firmly. Sophia smiled coldly. "You think locking the gates will keep the truth out? I came to give you a choice. Leave him before he drags you down with him." "I am not going anywhere," Lena replied. "You are angry because he survived and your brother did not. But destroying him will not bring your brother back." Sophia's voice turned sharp. "You know nothing about what I lost. And you know nothing about the man he has become," Lena said. "He is not perfect, but he is not the monster you keep chasing." For a moment, Sophia looked as if she might strike her. Then her expression softened into a sad, bitter smile. "You are naive, Mrs. Cross. Love does not save men like Ethan. It ruins them." She turned and walked back into the rain, her figure fading into the mist. When Ethan finally returned later that night, Lena was waiting in the foyer. His face was pale, his expression carved from exhaustion. "I saw the news," she said quietly. "So did I," he replied. "They are calling for a full investigation." "Then let them," she said. "You have nothing to hide." He met her eyes, searching them for doubt, but found none. "You still trust me?" "I do," she said simply, "and I will keep doing so until you give me a reason not to." For the first time, something in his posture broke. The armor of control he always wore cracked, just slightly. "You should not stand so close to a man the world is trying to destroy," he said softly. Lena stepped closer. "Then maybe the world needs to see what it looks like when someone refuses to let it win." Ivory. Outside, thunder rolled across the cliffs again. But inside the mansion, the storm had already begun, and for the first time, they were facing it together. The following morning broke under a sky the color of ash. A cold mist rolled in from the sea, wrapping the Cross estate in silence. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with tension. The world outside was tearing Ethan's name apart, but inside these walls, Lena refused to let fear take root. She sat in the dining room, scrolling through headlines on her tablet. Each one twisted the truth a little further. CEO Ethan Cross, accused of cover-up. Former partner's sister demands justice. Is the Cross Empire built on tragedy? Every word felt like a blade aimed at the man she had come to understand. Flawed, guarded, but not cruel. When she heard footsteps approaching, she looked up. Mrs. Keller entered, holding an envelope. "This just arrived by courier," she said. "It is addressed to you." Lena frowned. "To me?" "Yes. The man who delivered it said it came directly from the Tribune offices." Lena opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter written in elegant handwriting. "Mrs. Cross, you are standing on borrowed ground. If you truly care about truth, meet me at the Meridian Hotel at 6 o'clock this evening. Come alone. Bring no one. You deserve to see what your husband hides. No name, no signature." But she knew who had sent it. "Sophia," she murmured. Mrs. Keller looked concerned. "You are not going, are you?" Lena hesitated. "I have to. If there is something she plans to reveal, I need to know before the world does." Mrs. Keller's eyes softened, her voice firm. "Be careful. The truth is not always kind." By late afternoon, the rain began to fall again. Lena dressed simply, in a dark coat and scarf. She left the estate without telling anyone else, her driver dropping her off a block away from the hotel. The city lights shimmered through the rain like reflections in broken glass. Inside the Meridian's lounge, Sophia was waiting. She sat near the window, a glass of wine untouched before her. When she saw Lena, she smiled as if expecting her all along. "I wondered if you would come," Sophia said. "You are braver than I thought." Lena took a seat opposite her. "I am not here for your games. You said you had something to show me." Sophia opened her handbag and slid a folder across the table. "This is the police report from the night of the crash. I had it sealed years ago. Now, I think the world deserves to see it." Lena hesitated, then opened the folder. The report was brief but detailed. Ethan's name appeared several times, his blood alcohol level, his testimony, the witness statement of a security guard who claimed to have seen the two men arguing before they got into the car. Her chest tightened. "This does not prove what you think it does," she said. "It proves enough," Sophia replied coldly. "He was the driver. My brother tried to stop him. He did not listen." Lena looked up sharply. "And what about the rest? The part that says the brakes failed?" Sophia's expression flickered. "That was a convenient story. Money can make machines fail on paper." "No," Lena said, her voice steady. "I have seen the way he carries this. If he were guilty, he would have buried the truth, not live in its shadow every day." "Oh," Sophia leaned forward, her tone like ice. "You think love gives you clarity? It blinds you. When the story breaks tomorrow, you will see who he really is." Lena rose from her chair, her voice calm but firm. "If you truly believed in justice, you would not use grief as a weapon." She left the folder on the table and walked out into the rain. Back at the estate, the storm had grown fierce. Lightning flashed over the cliffs, and the wind howled through the trees. Ethan returned, just as Lena entered the foyer, rain dripping from her coat. His expression darkened when he saw her. "Where have you been?" "Meeting Sophia," she said. "She gave me this." She handed him the letter and described what she had seen. He closed his eyes briefly, then spoke in a low, controlled voice. "She is twisting the truth. I was driving that night, yes. But it was Jonathan who insisted we take that road. He wanted to confront a rival investor. I tried to stop him. The car hit a patch of oil and spun out. He pulled the wheel toward the cliff to avoid another car. He saved my life." Lena stepped closer, her voice soft. "You have carried that guilt all these years." "I owed him everything," Ethan said, his hands trembling slightly. "And Sophia never forgave me for surviving." She reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "Then let the world hear the truth from you, not from her." He shook his head. "They will not believe it." "Oh, they might not," she said, "but they will see who stands beside you when the storm comes." For the first time, Ethan looked at her not as a contract, not as a symbol, but as a partner. The silence between them was heavy with understanding. When the lightning struck again, it lit their faces, the millionaire, and the woman who had stepped into his world, not to destroy it, but to steady it. "I never meant for you to be part of this," he said quietly. "And yet, here I am," Lena replied. "You once told me fear keeps people alive. Maybe it is time to see what happens when we choose trust instead." Outside, thunder rolled across the sea. Inside, Ethan took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let us face it together. For the first time since she had met him, he smiled, not the polite smile of a man guarding his empire, but the fragile, human smile of someone finally ready to stop running from the past. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the mansion, the air shifted. The battle that once divided them had become the thread that bound them together, and though neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. For tonight, they stood united against lies, against fear, and against the ghosts that had chased Ethan Cross for far too long. The next morning came quietly, as if the storm had taken every sound with it when it passed. The sky was pale and heavy with clouds, and the sea below the cliffs rolled in slow, gray waves. Inside the Cross estate, silence hung like a thin veil between truth and consequence. Lena woke early. Her eyes felt heavy from a restless night, but her mind was clear. She walked down the grand staircase and stopped halfway, hearing voices coming from Ethan's study. The door was closed, but the tone of the conversation was sharp, restrained, and serious. She recognized one of the voices, Charles Whitman, Ethan's longtime business partner. "This situation cannot continue," Charles said. "The board is nervous. The investors want distance. The press has torn your reputation to pieces." "I am aware," Ethan replied calmly, though the exhaustion in his voice betrayed him. "They want you to step down temporarily," Charles continued, "until the investigation clears your name. It would protect the company." "And leave it defenseless?" Ethan asked. "If I step down, Sophia will move in before the ink dries on the press release." "Then what do you suggest?" "You cannot fight everyone, Ethan." "I do not intend to fight," he said. "I intend to win." Lena hesitated at the door, unsure if she should interrupt. Before she could decide, Charles stormed out, brushing past her with a look of frustration. Inside, Ethan stood behind his desk, staring at a series of documents spread across it. His expression was calm, but hollow. "How much did you hear?" he asked without looking up. "Enough," she said. "They want you to step down." He nodded slowly. It was inevitable. Fear makes men small, even the powerful ones. She approached him, her tone gentle but firm. "Then let them be small. You do not have to shrink with them." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You think I should stay and fight?" "I think you should tell the truth before someone else twists it again," she said. "Silence only makes lies louder." "Oh?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple," Lena said. "It is right." Later that afternoon, reporters crowded outside the gates again. The story had grown wilder. Overnight rumors of criminal negligence, whispers of secret payouts, even speculation about the legality of their marriage. "Mrs. Keller drew the curtains tight, her voice low as she spoke to Lena. "It will get worse before it gets better. They smell blood in the water." I know," Lena said, "but I will not hide." When Ethan entered the room, she turned to him. "You cannot keep waiting for this to fade. It will not. You have to face it." "I already have," he said. "I am calling a press conference. Tomorrow morning." Lena's heart skipped. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said simply. "If I am going to lose everything, I will lose it standing." That night, the mansion felt strangely alive. Staff moved quietly, preparing notes, arranging security. Ethan worked late in his study, drafting his statement. Lena stood in the doorway for a long moment before entering. "You should rest," she said softly. "I will after this," he replied without looking up. She crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You do not have to carry it all alone." For a moment, he did not move. Then he turned, looking at her with something between gratitude and disbelief. "Do you know what you are risking by standing with me?" "Yes," she said, "but I would rather stand beside you in chaos than alone in peace." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning neither dared to name. The next morning dawned gray and windless. The press gathered outside the Cross headquarters, cameras flashing like lightning. Inside the lobby, Ethan adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. His reflection looked calm, but his pulse hammered beneath his skin. Lena stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You do not owe them perfection," she said. "You only owe them honesty." He nodded once. "Then honesty is what they will get." As they stepped into the bright glare of the cameras, voices erupted from every direction. Questions flew like arrows. Mr. Cross, did you cause the crash? Did you pay off the police? Mrs. Cross, were you aware of his past before the marriage? Ethan raised a hand, and the noise softened. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying over the crowd. 10 years ago, I was in a car accident that took the life of my closest friend, Jonathan Grant. I was the driver. I was also the one who lived. For years, I blamed myself, even though the evidence proved it was mechanical failure. I did not pay anyone to hide the truth. I lived with it. I still do. The crowd was silent for a moment. Cameras clicked, recording every word. Ethan continued, his tone steady. Sophia Grant has every right to grieve her brother. But grief cannot turn falsehood into justice. I will not step down, and I will not run. Cross Enterprises will continue its work because it was built on resilience, not deceit. When he finished, Lena felt her heart swell with quiet pride. The reporters shouted more questions, but he did not answer. He turned and walked away from the podium, his hand finding hers as they exited the building. Back in the car, silence filled the space between them. Finally, Ethan spoke. You were right. Truth hurts less than fear. Lena looked out the window, watching the press fade behind them. Truth does not destroy, it cleanses. He smiled faintly, the first real smile she had seen in days. Then maybe there is hope after all. As the car wound its way back to the coast, the sky began to clear, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Cross was not running from his past, and for the first time, Lena felt that the walls of this cold, beautiful house might finally hold something real. The sun rose over the ocean in soft streaks of gold and pink. The Cross estate stood quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the calm that followed a storm. Ethan's public statement had shaken the city, but it had also shifted the narrative. For the first time, people were beginning to see him, not as a ruthless businessman hiding secrets, but as a man who had lived with loss and chosen to face it. Lena watched the news from the sitting room. The anchor's tone was different now, measured, almost respectful. Mr. Cross's honesty has changed public opinion overnight, one commentator said. He may still face an investigation, but his courage to confront the truth has earned sympathy. Oh, she turned off the television and looked out toward the sea. The waves below were calm, rhythmic, endless. She allowed herself a small smile. Mrs. Keller entered, holding a fresh pot of tea. He did it, she said warmly. He finally faced them. He did more than that, Lena replied softly. He freed himself. Later that morning, Ethan returned from the city. The drive up the long stone path felt different this time, less guarded, less heavy. When he entered the house, Lena met him in the foyer. His suit was still sharp, but the tiredness around his eyes was gone. The world did not end, he said with a wry smile. Not yet, she replied. But I think it just started believing in you again. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. You were right, Lena. Hiding the truth was harder than facing it. She smiled faintly. It usually is. Os? For a moment, they simply stood there, the sound of the ocean filling the quiet between them. Then Mrs. Keller appeared at the doorway. Mr. Cross, there is someone waiting in your study. She said you would want to see her. Ethan frowned slightly. Who? Mrs. Keller hesitated. Sophia Grant. Lena felt her stomach tighten, but Ethan's expression did not change. Send her in. A few minutes later, Sophia entered the study. The woman who had once arrived with arrogance now carried a different air, composed, but weary. She looked at Ethan, then at Lena, who stood quietly by the window. I did not come here to fight, Sophia said. I came to end this. Ethan gestured toward a chair. Then sit. Let us speak like people who have lost enough already. She sat, but did not touch the coffee Mrs. Keller had placed on the table. The story will fade soon, she began. The papers are already turning on me. They think I exaggerated. You did more than that, Ethan said calmly. You nearly destroyed what was left of your brother's memory. Sophia's voice cracked slightly. Do not talk to me about memory. You wake up every day in a mansion built on what you call guilt. I wake up knowing my brother's death never meant justice. Ethan leaned forward. Jonathan's death was not justice or punishment. It was tragedy. But if you think hurting me has brought him peace, you are wrong. Oh. Sophia looked at him for a long moment, then turned her gaze to Lena. And you? Do you really believe this man deserves redemption? Lena met her eyes steadily. I believe no one heals by destroying someone else. You wanted to make him suffer, but he already has for years. You are not carrying your brother's memory anymore, Sophia. You are carrying your anger. Sophia's composure faltered. Her voice softened. He was my only family. I know, Lena said gently, but maybe it is time to stop living in the night he died. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. Finally, Sophia stood. I am leaving the city. I have sold my shares in the company. I do not want to see either of you again. Ethan rose as well. Then let me say this before you go. Your brother saved my life. Everything I have built since that night was to honor that debt. You can hate me if you must, but do not erase what he stood for. Sophia hesitated, her expression unreadable. You always were good with words. Then she left, her heels clicking softly down the marble hallway. When the sound of the door closing faded, Ethan exhaled. It is over. Lena shook her head slightly. No. It is beginning. He looked at her, puzzled. What do you mean? You faced the world, she said. But now you have to learn to live again for yourself. Not for guilt, not for the company, just for you. Oh. Ethan smiled faintly, though there was a trace of vulnerability in his eyes. I would not know where to start. Maybe start with breakfast tomorrow, without reading a report, she teased. He laughed quietly, the sound rare but real. That might be the hardest challenge yet. That evening, as the sun began to set over the ocean, the house filled with a softer kind of light. The heavy curtains were open now, and the air smelled of salt and renewal. Ethan stood on the balcony, watching the horizon, while Lena joined him with 2 cups of coffee. It feels different, she said. It does, he replied. For the first time, this place feels like home. They stood together in silence. The world outside would still whisper, and tomorrow would still bring its share of problems. But tonight, they allowed themselves something rare peace. As the waves broke against the cliffs below, Ethan looked at Lena and said quietly, I do not know what I did to deserve you in all this. You signed a contract, she said with a soft laugh. You just did not read the fine print. He smiled, shaking his head. The best mistake I ever made. And for the first time since their story began, the distance between them felt like it had finally disappeared, not because the world had forgiven them, but because they had forgiven themselves. The days that followed felt almost unreal. For the first time in months, the Cross estate was free from headlines, reporters, and the constant tension of scandal. The ocean was calm again. The staff smiled when they passed Lena in the halls, and even Mrs. Keller hummed softly while arranging flowers in the dining room. The air itself seemed lighter. Ethan spent his mornings in the garden instead of his office. The sharp edge that once defined him was softening, though he tried to hide it. Lena could see the change, the way his voice grew warmer when he spoke to the staff, the way he stopped checking his phone every few minutes. He was learning to live in quiet moments. One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the windows, Lena found him sitting on the terrace with a stack of papers spread across the table. You are working again, she said, half teasing, half concerned. He looked up and smiled faintly. Not exactly. These are letters. Some are from the families who received grants from the Cross Foundation. I never read them before. She pulled up a chair beside him. Why not? He hesitated. Because I built that foundation to erase my guilt, not to feel better. I thought reading their words would make me weak. And now? She asked. He glanced at her, then turned his gaze toward the ocean. Now I think weakness is not feeling at all. Lena reached for one of the letters and began to read aloud. It was from a young woman whose scholarship had been funded by the foundation. Her handwriting was simple but full of gratitude. She wrote about becoming the first in her family to finish medical school, about saving her first patient, and about how Ethan's grant had changed her life. When Lena finished, the silence between them was deep and full. You have no idea how many lives you have touched, she said softly. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Maybe that is the point. Sometimes the best things we do are the ones we never notice. She smiled. That sounds almost poetic. Do not tell anyone, he said with a hint of a grin. It might ruin my reputation. For a while, they sat quietly, listening to the sound of the waves and the distant cry of seabirds. The house, once cold and full of secrets, now felt alive. That evening, Ethan suggested something unexpected. "Lena," he said, standing at the doorway of the library, "come with me tomorrow." "I'll buy." She looked up from her book. "Where?" "To the city. There is something I need to show you." The next morning, they drove along the coast road, the city skyline slowly coming into view. Ethan was quiet for most of the drive, his expression unreadable. When they arrived, he led her to a large building with glass walls and a simple bronze plaque by the entrance. It read, "The Jonathan Grant Rehabilitation Center." Lena froze. "You built this?" He nodded. "After the accident, it is a place for people recovering from trauma, physical and emotional. It has been open for years, but I never visited until now." She turned to him, her voice gentle. "Why today?" "Because for the first time I feel like I can." Inside, the halls were bright and filled with quiet energy. Patients walked slowly with therapists beside them, sunlight spilling through the tall windows. A nurse recognized Ethan and approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Cross, it is good to see you here. Everyone knows your name, but few believed you would actually visit." Ethan's expression softened. "It is time they know I am real." The nurse led them through the facility, showing them the therapy rooms, the art studios, and the gardens where patients worked with their hands. Everywhere Lena looked, she saw traces of hope, small, steady, human. In one corner, a boy sat sketching on a notepad. His right leg was in a brace, but his eyes were bright. When he noticed Ethan, he smiled shyly. "Are you the man who built this place?" Ethan nodded. "I helped. Yes." "Thank you," the boy said simply. "My mom says this place gave me my second chance." Ethan's throat tightened, and for a moment, he could not speak. Lena stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "He is right," she said softly. "You gave second chances to them, and to yourself." As they left the center, the city stretched out before them, alive and loud, but for once, it did not feel like a battlefield. Ethan stood on the steps, looking up at the building that bore his late friend's name. "I used to think redemption meant undoing the past," he said. "But maybe it just means living better because of it." Lena smiled. "That sounds like something Jonathan would have wanted." He looked at her, his voice low but full of sincerity. "You sound like him sometimes." She shook her head. "No. I sound like someone who finally believes in you." They drove back to the coast in quiet peace. The sun was setting when they reached the mansion, painting the ocean in streaks of orange and rose. Ethan turned to her as they stepped out of the car. "You know," he said, "I built everything in my life out of fear, money, walls, distance. But now I realize the only thing worth building is something that lasts beyond me." Lena looked toward the sea. "Then start with something simple. Start with kindness." "Ugh." He smiled, and for the first time, the look in his eyes was not haunted. It was clear, grounded, almost hopeful. That night, as the waves rolled gently against the cliffs, Ethan Cross finally allowed himself to breathe. And somewhere deep inside the mansion that had once felt like a cage, something had shifted quietly, irrevocably from survival to healing. The following week unfolded with a quiet rhythm that neither of them had known before. The world outside was still recovering from the storm of scandal, but inside the Cross estate, life had found a fragile calm. The air carried the scent of salt and roses, and the tension that once haunted every corner had begun to fade. Ethan spent his mornings walking the cliffs, no longer in silence but in thought. Sometimes Lena joined him, their steps falling into the same rhythm without words. The ocean below seemed endless, yet somehow lighter, as if it, too, had been holding its breath for too long. One morning, as the sunlight broke through the clouds, Lena brought 2 cups of coffee to the terrace. Ethan was standing by the railing, watching the horizon. His posture was different now, less guarded, more open. "You look like a man at peace," she said softly, handing him the cup. He smiled faintly. "Peace still feels strange. For years, I thought stillness meant weakness." Maybe it means strength," she said. "The kind that does not need to prove anything." He took a sip of coffee, then turned to her. "You always find the right words." She smiled, a little shyly. "Maybe because I had to learn to listen." They stood there for a long time, the morning light warming their faces. Then, Ethan said quietly. I've been thinking about ending the contract. Her heart skipped. What do you mean? The 1-year agreement, he said. You signed it to help your brother. His debt is gone. The company is stable again. You are free to leave if you want to. Lena looked down, her fingers tightening around the cup. The words should have brought relief, but instead, they left an ache in her chest. And what if I do not want to? He blinked, caught off guard. You would stay? She nodded slowly. When I first came here, I thought you were a man who built walls out of money and silence. But now I see you for what you are, a man who forgot how to be loved. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. And you think you can fix that? No, she said softly. I think you already are. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, it was fragile, alive with unspoken meaning. Later that day, Ethan went into the city for a board meeting, leaving Lena at the estate. The staff had grown fond of her, and she spent the afternoon in the garden with Mrs. Keller, trimming the roses that lined the path. You know, Mrs. Keller said, smiling as she handed her a pair of gloves, I have not seen Mr. Cross smile like that in years. He used to treat happiness as if it were a luxury he could not afford. Lena smiled faintly. Maybe he just needed to remember it is free. As the sun began to set, Ethan returned. His car stopped at the gate, and Lena could tell something had changed. His expression was serious, though not in the way it once was. He approached her slowly, his hand still holding the briefcase. The board accepted my proposal, he said. I am stepping back from the company for a while. Her eyes widened. You are leaving Cross Enterprises? Not leaving, he said. Letting it run without me. I built it to prove something. Now I want to build something that matters. She studied him quietly. And what does that look like? He looked out toward the sea. Something smaller. Something honest. Maybe another center, like the one in the city. For people who cannot afford help. For those who think their lives are over, but still have a chance. Lena felt a warmth rise in her chest. That sounds like the real Ethan Cross. He chuckled softly. Maybe it is. Or maybe it is the man you have been trying to see all along. That evening, the mansion was bathed in gold light, as the sun sank below the cliffs. Ethan and Lena dined together in the smaller room, overlooking the sea, a place that had once felt too grand, now intimate. The meal was simple, but the air between them was full of something unspoken, something waiting. After dinner, they walked through the garden. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of salt mixed with the sweetness of flowers. Ethan stopped near the fountain, where the moonlight reflected on the water. Lena, he said quietly, do you remember what you told me the night I signed that contract? She frowned slightly. I said a lot of things that night. You said that love without kindness is just another form of control, he said. At the time, I thought it was naive. Now I think it might be the smartest thing anyone has ever told me. She smiled, her voice soft. You used to believe control was the same as safety. Now you know better. Okay. He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I know that safety means nothing if you have no one to share it with. For a moment, neither spoke. The night air hummed around them, filled with the quiet rhythm of the sea. Finally, Lena said, maybe this was never about a contract. Maybe it was about finding the version of yourself that you buried under everything else. Ethan nodded slowly. And maybe it was about finding you. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of rain and ocean spray. The waves crashed below like a heartbeat, steady, relentless, alive. He turned to her then, his voice low but steady. When you came into my life, I thought I was rescuing you. Now I know it was the other way around. Lena looked at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. Then do not thank me. Just keep going. Oh. He smiled, and for the first time, it was not the smile of a man hiding behind power, it was the smile of someone finally beginning to live. The waves rolled on, and above them, the moon hung bright and unbroken. In that moment, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, the air around the Cross estate carried a quiet sense of renewal. The sunlight poured softly through the tall windows, illuminating the marble floors and the framed photographs that had once felt like decorations but now told a story of survival. The storm was gone, the world was calm, and for the first time, Ethan Cross woke without feeling the weight of guilt pressing against his chest. He found Lena in the garden, kneeling beside a patch of lavender that she had planted weeks earlier. Her hair was loose, her sleeves rolled up, and there was a faint smile on her face as she brushed the soil from her hands. He paused at the edge of the path, just watching her. "You know," he said finally, "the board members called me this morning. They said I was making a mistake stepping back from the company." She glanced up, shielding her eyes from the sunday. "And what did you tell them?" "That they might be right," he said. "But it is a mistake I am willing to live with." She smiled. "You sound like a man who finally understands what he wants." Ethan walked closer, his tone thoughtful. "For the first time, I think I do. I want to build something that has meaning. I want to spend my time doing work that helps people heal, not just accumulate wealth. And," he paused, his gaze softening, "I want to stop running from the things that matter." Lena stood, brushing the dirt from her palms. "Then maybe you are ready to live instead of survive." He looked at her, and for a brief moment, the world felt still. The sound of the sea drifted in the distance, steady and grounding. That afternoon, Ethan drove them into the small coastal town nearby. It was market day, and the streets were alive with chatter and the scent of fresh bread and sea air. For once, no one recognized him as the powerful businessman. To the locals, he was simply another man walking beside a woman, laughing softly as they passed the flower stalls. They stopped at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. Lena ordered tea, while Ethan tried a cup of coffee that was far less refined than what he was used to, but somehow, it tasted better. He looked around, watching families, fishermen, and shopkeepers going about their lives. "It is strange," he said, almost to himself. "These people have so little, but they seem richer than anyone I have ever met." "Maybe because they measure life differently," Lena replied. "They do not count it in dollars or success. They count it in time and peace." He nodded slowly. "Time and peace. Two things I never thought I would have." Lena sipped her tea. "You have them now. You just need to hold on to them." As they left the cafe, a small boy accidentally bumped into Ethan, nearly dropping a crate of fruit. Ethan knelt, steadying it before the boy could fall. The child looked up, wide-eyed. "Thank you, mister." Ethan smiled. "You are welcome." Lena watched the exchange quietly, her heart tightening at the sight. The man who once lived behind walls of pride and control now knelt on a street corner, helping a stranger with gentle patience. When they returned to the estate, the evening light cast the cliffs in shades of gold and amber. The house no longer felt like a fortress of secrets. It felt like a home warm, alive, and full of new beginnings. Mrs. Keller met them at the door with a soft smile. "Dinner will be ready soon. And Mr. Cross, the first group of volunteers for the new foundation, has confirmed their arrival next week." Ethan's expression brightened. "Good. I want them to feel that this is not about business, it is about purpose." "That sounds like something your father would never have said," Mrs. Keller remarked kindly. He smiled faintly. "That is exactly why I am saying it." Later that night, Lena walked along the balcony overlooking the sea. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the waves. Ethan joined her, standing a few steps away. "I keep thinking about what comes next," he said quietly. "For the first time, it feels like the future is not something I need to control. It is something I can choose." Lena turned to him. "And what do you choose?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I choose to keep building something that lasts, something that helps, not hurts. And I choose," he stopped, searching her face. "I choose to stop pretending this marriage was ever just a contract." Her breath caught, the words settling between them like a fragile truth finally spoken. "Ethan," she began, but he shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You do not need to say anything yet. I just needed you to know. You came into my life because of obligation. But somewhere along the way, that changed. You did not just save me from the past, you reminded me what it feels like to care again." The wind carried his words out toward the sea, as if the ocean itself wanted to hold them. Lena looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Then promise me one thing. Anything. Whatever you build next, make sure it comes from the man you are now, not the one you were trying to be." He smiled. "That I can promise." The night deepened, and the waves crashed gently below. They stood side by side, not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two people who had found each other in the ruins of loss and built something stronger in its place. In the distance, The lighthouse beam swept across the cliffs, a steady rhythm of light in the dark, an echo of everything they had survived, and a quiet reminder that even the most broken paths can still lead home. The following morning began with the sound of waves brushing softly against the cliffs and the scent of sea salt carried in through the open windows. The Cross estate, once a place of isolation, now felt alive again. In the distance, laughter echoed faintly from the staff preparing the guest cottages for the new volunteers who would arrive within days. Lena stood on the balcony, watching the horizon turn from gray to gold. The ocean no longer looked cold, it shimmered like a promise. She breathed in deeply, feeling a stillness inside her that had taken months to find. Behind her, the sound of quiet footsteps drew closer. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, the sunlight catching in his hair. "You are up early again," he said, his voice carrying a calm warmth that she had never heard from him before. "I could not sleep," she replied. "Too much peace, maybe." He smiled faintly. "That is a rare kind of complaint." She turned toward him. "It feels different now. The house, the air, even you." He leaned against the doorway, watching her. "I spent years building walls to protect myself. And now, I am trying to remember what it means to live without them." Lena looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe you are learning to trust that not everyone who walks into your life comes to take something away." He nodded. "Maybe." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that did not need words. The sea breeze moved gently through her hair, and the morning sun glowed softly between them. After breakfast, Ethan drove into the city to finalize arrangements for the foundation's expansion. Lena stayed behind, helping Mrs. Keller organize rooms for the arriving volunteers. The halls that had once echoed with loneliness were now filled with movement and laughter. She realized how much the mansion had changed, how much they had changed. By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened slightly, hinting at rain. Lena walked down the long corridor toward Ethan's study, carrying a folder of documents she had promised to organize for him. When she entered the room, her eyes fell on an old sketchbook left open on his desk. The pages were worn, the edges frayed, but the drawings inside stopped her cold. They were sketches of buildings, faces, and landscapes, drawn in confident strokes, but one image appeared again and again. A woman standing near the sea, her hair caught in the wind. It was her. Lena traced her finger lightly over the pencil lines, her heart tightening. She had never known he could draw, and she certainly never imagined she had been the subject of his quiet reflection. "Curiosity suits you," Ethan's voice said softly from behind her. She turned quickly, caught off guard. "I did not mean to." "It is all right," he said. "I forgot I left that there." "You drew these?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I used to sketch when I was younger. I stopped years ago. But after you came here, I started again." "Why?" He paused, his gaze steady. "Because for the first time in a long while, I had something worth remembering." The room fell silent. The rain began tapping gently against the windows, the steady rhythm filling the space between them. Lena closed the sketchbook slowly. "You said once that fear keeps people alive. Do you still believe that?" He shook his head. "No, not anymore. Fear may keep people alive, but it does not let them live. You taught me that." Her heart swelled with quiet emotion. "Then maybe you are finally ready to stop surviving." He took a step closer, his voice softer. "I think I already have." For a moment, the only sound was the rain and the faint hum of the ocean outside. Then Ethan said, "There is something I need to ask you, Lena. Not as part of any contract, not as part of obligation." She met his gaze, her pulse quickening. "What is it?" He hesitated, his tone careful but sincere. "When this all began, I asked you to marry me for business, for convenience. But now, I want to ask again for real this time." Lena blinked, her breath catching. "Ethan." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside, there was no diamond, just a simple silver band. "I do not want to bind you with wealth," he said quietly. "I want to promise you with truth. You gave me back my life, and I want to spend the rest of it proving that I deserve the second chance you gave me." Tears stung her eyes, unbidden but sincere. "You do not have to prove anything," she whispered. "You already did." He smiled softly. "Then stay, not because of the contract, or the house, or the past. Stay because this what we have feels real. She looked at him, and for the first time, every wall she had built within herself seemed to fall away. I never wanted to leave, she said simply. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, washing the world clean. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger light. Unpretentious. Perfect. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. They did not need to. The thunder rolled softly in the distance, and the air between them felt alive with everything they had endured and everything they had yet to build. When the rain eased, Lena stepped closer to the window, watching the water trail down the glass. Do you think the past will ever stop chasing us? She asked quietly. Ethan joined her, his voice calm. The past does not chase us, Lena. It only waits for us to stop running. And now, we have. She smiled, leaning her head gently against his shoulder. The storm outside continued, but inside, there was peace, the kind that came not from forgetting the past, but from finally learning to live beyond it. As the last light of day faded across the horizon, Ethan reached for her hand, and in the glow of the soft gray sky, two lives once broken by fear found their way, at last, to something unshakably whole. The morning after the rain carried the scent of renewal. The air was crisp, washed clean by the storm, and the world outside the Cross estate glistened beneath the pale sunlight. The ocean stretched wide and calm, its surface broken only by the slow rhythm of the waves. Inside the mansion, there was a quiet warmth that had never existed before, a sense of home that had grown not from luxury, but from forgiveness. Lena woke early, her mind still replaying the moment from the night before Ethan's voice, the simplicity of the ring, the sincerity in his eyes when he said he wanted her to stay. There had been no grand gestures, no extravagant promises, only truth. And that, she realized, was what made it beautiful. When she walked into the kitchen, Mrs. Keller was already there, humming softly as she arranged a tray of breakfast. The older woman smiled when she saw the ring on Lena's hand. So, it finally happened, she said warmly. I was beginning to wonder how long the two of you would keep pretending it was still a business arrangement. Lena laughed softly. He caught me by surprise. Good, Mrs. Keller said with a wink. That man needed to learn how to do something without planning it first. By the time Ethan joined them, dressed casually in a white shirt and dark slacks, the air between them felt light, almost playful. I see my secret is already out, he said, glancing at Mrs. Keller. She did not need to tell me, the housekeeper said. I could feel the difference in the air the moment you walked in this morning. Ethan smiled faintly. Then I suppose I have you to thank for keeping this place alive while I was learning how to live again. Mrs. Keller waved him off. You two did that yourselves. She turned to Lena. Now go on. The volunteers will be arriving any moment. You both have work to do. Outside, the sound of car engines approached along the gravel driveway. Lena stepped onto the terrace, her eyes widening as she saw the small group gathering near the entrance, men and women of different ages, carrying boxes, notebooks, and bright energy. The Cross Foundation's new project was officially beginning, and for the first time, it was not about money or prestige. It was about purpose. Ethan greeted each person personally, shaking hands, listening carefully to their introductions. He was still composed and confident, but Lena noticed something different. His words no longer carried the sharpness of control. They carried warmth, gratitude, and respect. When the group gathered in the main hall, Ethan addressed them with quiet sincerity. For many years, I thought success meant winning, he began. But success without meaning is nothing more than noise. What we build here is not for recognition or profit. It is for the people who have lost their way, the people who need to remember that life still has value. Every wall we raise, every life we touch, will stand as proof that second chances exist. The room fell silent, and then applause rippled through the air. Lena stood near the back, her eyes shining. She knew how much it cost him to speak those words, to admit he had once been lost himself. Later, after the volunteers had been shown to their quarters, Lena found Ethan on the terrace overlooking the sea. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression calm but thoughtful. You did well today, she said softly. He turned, smiling. So did you. You kept me from hiding behind my old instincts. I did not do anything, she said. You just finally stopped fighting yourself. He looked out toward the ocean. the light catching in his eyes. For so long, I thought my life ended the night of the crash, but now I realize it only paused. I was waiting for something to wake me up again. She stepped closer. And now? Now, he said quietly, I am awake. They stood together as the afternoon wind picked up, carrying the faint laughter of the volunteers from across the garden. It felt like the house itself was breathing again, every corner filled with purpose and life. As the sun began to set, the two of them walked down the stone path that led toward the cliffs. The sky turned shades of gold and rose, the air warm and soft. Ethan stopped near the edge, his gaze sweeping the horizon. This view used to make me feel small, he said. Now it reminds me that the world is bigger than my mistakes. Lena smiled. Maybe that is what forgiveness feels like. He nodded. And maybe you were the one who taught me how to find it. The wind lifted her hair, and for a brief second, time felt suspended. She looked at him, the man who had once been a symbol of control and fear, and saw something entirely different now. A man who had chosen truth over pride, love over power. Ethan, she said softly, what happens next? He turned toward her, his expression calm, his voice steady. Next, we build, together. The simplicity of his answer filled her with warmth. There was no need for promises or declarations. The truth was already there, in the quiet connection between them, in the peace that had replaced years of turmoil. As they walked back toward the house, the first lights began to glow from the windows, casting golden reflections across the stone path. The mansion no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a home where new beginnings waited. That night, Lena stood at the window of her room, watching the stars emerge above the sea. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of Ethan's footsteps approaching. He stopped beside her, silent for a moment before saying, When I first met you, I thought you were my solution. Now I know you were my reminder that life does not have to be earned through pain. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. And what am I now? He smiled, reaching for her hand. You are my reason to stay. Outside, the tide rolled in, gentle and constant, as if echoing the quiet rhythm of their hearts. And for the first time, the story that began as a transaction had become something far more real, a love that had survived storms, secrets, and time itself. The morning light washed gently across the Cross estate, soft and golden, carrying the quiet rhythm of a new beginning. The sound of waves brushed against the cliffs below, steady and calm. The same sea that had once reflected Ethan's turmoil now shimmered with peace. The house that had witnessed years of loneliness was alive with warmth, laughter, and the scent of blooming lavender from the garden. Lena stood by the open window, watching the volunteers walk through the gardens, their hands full of notebooks and plans. The Foundation's first project was officially underway. What had begun as a contract written in fear had turned into a mission built on hope. Ethan joined her, still holding a mug of coffee. He looked at the ocean for a long moment before saying quietly, It feels different today, like everything finally makes sense. Lena turned toward him, smiling. It does. You rebuilt your life not with money or power, but with purpose. He nodded slowly. And I could not have done it alone. You were never meant to, she said. He looked at her hand, at the simple silver ring that now caught the morning light. You know, he said softly, I used to think strength meant standing alone, but now I know real strength is learning to stand with someone. Lena smiled. Then I guess we both became stronger. They walked outside together, down the stone path that led to the cliffs. The breeze was gentle, the sky wide and open. Ethan stopped near the edge, where the world seemed to stretch endlessly before them. I used to look out at this view and see distance, he said. Now, I see possibility. Lena slipped her hand into his. That is what love does. It changes how you see everything. He turned toward her, his expression calm but full of quiet gratitude. You changed everything, Lena. You turned a mistake into a miracle. She looked at him, her voice soft. No, you did that yourself. I just reminded you how. As the wind lifted her hair and the sea glittered below, Ethan pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then let us keep reminding each other, he whispered. Together, they stood at the edge of the world, not as the man who once built walls and the woman who signed a contract, but as two souls who had chosen truth over fear, kindness over pride, and love over everything else. The waves crashed softly below, echoing the final line of their story, a story that began with duty but ended in freedom.